is an Atlanta-based actor, mixed media artist, and writer whose studio practice is rooted in the discipline of sculpture. A graduate of Morehouse College and the Savannah College of Art and Design, Masud has exhibited his work in shows internationally. As an actor, he has appeared in numerous television shows and is the co-host of Undaunted, a podcast series that centers the work of social changemakers. Tonight, Masud will share about how we can find community and hope in Baha'u'llah's revelation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Laylee, did you write that yourself, Laylee? That was a really good introduction. Did you like write that yourself?
Guru sent it to me.
It sounds vaguely familiar. I'm just messing with you. Thank you. Wow. First of all, guys, hey, look, I'm sorry for being late. I had an event that I had to go to, and there was just a lot of really interesting people and good food, and then it was in the middle of these two people who were presenting their talk, and I didn't want to leave before they had an opportunity to say a few things. I didn't want to leave in the middle of it, so that's why I'm late. Thank you guys for sticking around. Always honored and amazed that people want to stick around to hear me say anything. It's probably because I live with my voice in my head all the time, so I get tired of it, and always amazed that people aren't tired of it too. Maybe some people are, I don't know. Happy to be here with you. And Farouz approached me about doing the talk. I was thinking about, what to share and kind of what to focus on. And I thought about talking about a number of different subjects, social issues, things that are going on in the world, and that'll be part of what I share tonight. Just a quick note, speaking to groups of people is always fun, but I really like the give and take at the end, the exchange, the conversation. So that's why I do these things, because I learn so much in the exchange. So please don't be shy. If you have a thought or a question at the end, and hopefully we can have a vigorous dialogue. That's where a lot of the learning takes place for me. When I was recently in DC not too long ago, I had an opportunity to go to Dr. King's memorial there on the Mall. And I'm sure some of you have been there. It's a beautiful memorial, and it's essentially a carving of him in stone. And it looks like his figure has been carved out of a mountain. And the inspiration for the sculptor, who did a masterful job of depicting Dr. King and his likeness, and then also using a phrase from Dr. King as a touchstone of inspiration, was the phrase is, "From a mountain of despair, a stone of hope." And I remember reading that, hearing that when I was a kid in Dr. King's speeches. I grew up listening to Dr. King all the time, listening to the speeches of Malcolm X, and others, Stokely Carmichael and others. But there was something about that phrase that just really moved me. It was, I think it's this idea that in some of our darkest moments, we can find the light. As Rumi says, it is the wound that allows the light to break through. So it's that same kind of thought process, the same kind of idea. And obviously, right now, that phrase, "from mountain of despair, stone of hope," feels very, very appropriate to where we are in the world, particularly in the West, particularly in America. All of the social upheavals that we have going on, be they pick any number of the isms that you choose to pick: racism, sexism, excessive materialism, a robust sense of individualism. And all of these afflictions or spiritual diseases, as the Baha'i writings refers to them as, and there's also that Dr. King, who once called racism a spiritual disease. So all of these things are affecting us all, impacting our society, the way we relate to each other. Race racism, which has been here since, been in America since the founding of the country, and the establishment of slavery. Sexism, of course, perhaps being the oldest form of marginalization and subjugation in human history. Materialism, of course, being this excessive focus on the accumulation of goods at the expense of others or in spite of others, people living on the street, not having enough. And excessive individualism is focused on the self as the kind of supreme talisman, the sine qua non, or the focus of all human endeavor, individualism. And of course, we see here in the United States, as I'm witnessing the undermining of the institutions, the disruption of social norms, all of the things that we previously had placed a lot of our hope and our faith in crumbling, because it seems as though, as Malcolm X once said, chickens are coming home to roost. That the things that we've cultivated as a society, these different isms, now are giving birth to this society that is no longer embarrassed about these sicknesses and these illnesses, but is actually putting them on full display and centering them in the discourse and the way we relate to one another. And I recently, when I was, I took a trip to the continent of Africa and spent 3 weeks there. And one of the reasons why I left was because of the prevalence of racism in the country of my birth. My experience of dealing with the issue of race since I was a child, the historical trauma of that, and then also the very real present-day trauma, the murder of Black and brown people in the streets of the United States by police, and the distance, right, between the dissonance between our affirmations or our proclamations of justice and the distance between that and the realization of justice itself, right? So, it was when Ahmaud Arbery and then also the brother in Minneapolis who was killed, also Breonna Taylor, and the others, that I felt very strongly the weight of what was going on around me. I felt a kind of, not only just a momentary trauma, but a kind of historical trauma, because these things have been going on for so long. And it was at that moment that I felt like I needed to get away to and to kind of clear my head and to be in a space where I felt less the oppressive history of racialized trauma. But then it wasn't only that. It's also the individualism and the other isms that continue to undermine our society. And when you focus on these things, you have to be careful, because if you spend too much time with them, they can have a tendency to almost weigh on your spirit and on your soul. And if you're not careful, you can drift into a kind of pessimism that ultimately can lead into a kind of nihilism that is self-destructive and other-destructive. And for me, I have, I think, for the most part, throughout the course of my life, always been a kind of inherently hopeful person. And that hope kind of being born as a young child. And my father used to always tell me to read the Bible. And so I did that. I used to read the Old and New Testament. And then we wound up becoming members of the Nation of Islam because of my father's great respect for Malcolm X. And I did a lot of reading while I was in high school, reading books by great writers such as Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Jamaica Kincaid, and others. And all of these different sources became points of inspiration for me through very dark moments. Of course, as an artist and a creative person, that kind of being at the center of my life in terms of my professional engagement with the world. has always been a source of hope. But there are times when we're confronted with the convulsions of the world, the earthquakes, and we can find ourselves drifting into a place that ultimately, if we're not careful, we can get trapped there, and in the end become part of the problem and not part of the solution. I became a Baha'i in 1992. At that point, I was a student at Morehouse College here in Atlanta, Georgia. I thought I was going to be an Episcopalian priest at that time. I had begun a really deep spiritual search after some upheavals in my family, and I needed something that I felt would be more stable for my life to give me a kind of framework and a purpose going forward. I never came from a family that had a very fixed kind of religious expression. We kind of bounced around from one thing to the next. And in some ways that didn't serve me, but in other ways it did serve me. I was going through a very dark period at the time that I heard about the Baha'i faith. I was kind of feeling a bit lost and unmoored, and I was looking for something that could give me a deeper sense, understanding of myself and my relationship to the larger society. And up until that point, my engagement with religion had been primarily through the prism of the Christian faith. As most people of African descent here in the West, whether you came over here as an enslaved person, as a practitioner of Islam, or one of the indigenous African religions, you were generally forcibly converted to Christianity. Of course, enslaved Africans took Christianity and combined it with their traditional practices in Africa and created something new and something that was wholly their own. But nevertheless, my experience had been primarily through the prism of Christianity. But I had some significant challenges with the practice of Christianity here in the West and indeed around the world. There were some questions that I constantly was haunted by that I couldn't resolve within myself. Some of those had to do with the fact that there were so many denominations of Christianity, but there was a single book, the Bible. Even though the Bible itself had been in some ways modified following the Council of Nicaea, I believe in the 6th century, in which Christ became one with God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. That was something that was decided on in council. Other writings were kind of cast to the side, and others were centered. So I had a problem with the various different denominations of Christianity, be it Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalian, all of the various derivations that you can imagine and that we all know, Presbyterian, what have you, because it seemed that if the message was one, then the church itself should be one. So that was something that, it wasn't something that I went looking for, it was something that my mind couldn't resolve. There seemed to be a disconnect between the establishment of all these various different denominations, all coming from this single seed of the Christian faith, and all of them disagreeing on who had the right path to Christianity, which I found to be quite interesting. Other lingering questions were, in the midst of all of the different variations of Christianity, why there were all of these, I think it was Malcolm X who said that Sunday in America is the most segregated day of the week. So why were there these different kind of racialized churches that were, that were divided along racial lines? There's a black church, there's a white church, there's an Asian church, predominantly Latino churches, so forth and so on. And, excepting for rare exceptions, usually the practice was that you went to church with the community in which you lived or you were accustomed to or that you felt comfortable around. And again, there's that was something that I didn't go looking for. I mean, a problem with that. There was just something in my mind logically that I couldn't resolve within myself. And then there was the Muslim problem. And when I say problem, I'm saying it's not a problem with Islam. I'm saying it's a problem of the Christianity's relationship to Islam. I couldn't understand why there were over 1 billion people who called themselves believers in the Islamic faith, but according to the teachings that I was being exposed to within the context of certain denominations of Christianity, they were all going to hell. And it just, that again, didn't make any sense to me. And there were other things. That there was another thing I would want to mention is the schism between science and religion, and how, again, something that I just, my father always, my mother used to tell me all the time, boy, you sure have a lot of questions. And I don't know why I've always had a lot of questions, but I've just always been a kind of curious person. So I was that child who would always ask why. So my mother would ask me to do something, okay, why? My dad would ask me to do something, okay, why? So that pattern of questioning things is just something that has always been with me. So this schism between science and religion to me there was something about it that seemed fundamentally problematic. I couldn't understand, again, this is me questioning why. Why, if a rational God gave us reason, the ability to investigate and to know, why then was it unacceptable to look for answers through the investigation process of science? Why were they not to be trusted? Why were they not to be looked at critically, thoughtfully? And why was, when something was proven out, why was that new knowledge, why was there a suspicion about the new knowledge that inquiry yielded? And then on the other side, reading the Bible, which is written in metaphor and allegory, these exquisite stories which are all about love and hope and intrigue and hate and rivalries and coming together and war and romance. I mean, it's all in the Bible. And understanding that Christ spoke to the people in metaphor so that they would understand. He would speak to them in a way that they would understand. So parables like, it is more difficult for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle. Of course, that's a metaphor. He's using, a situation to relate to something else, to paint a picture of how difficult it is to walk a quote unquote a righteous path when you have access to large resources, how much more difficult that is to live for God when you are devoted to money. So again, as me being an inquisitive, curious person, these are things that just haunted me. And so when I was going through this dark period in my life, at that time I had, there was a member of my family who left. It was a very painful process. I just wasn't feeling grounded as a person. I was in this very dark night of the soul, if you can call it that. And I was introduced to the Baha'i faith by a young woman I was seeing at Savannah College, who incidentally was not a Baha'i, but she thought I would like the faith. And I had never heard of the Baha'i faith before. But again, I'm sitting with these questions, right? The word Baha'i fell off my lips in a strange way. As far as I was concerned, if I hadn't heard about it, it really didn't exist or it wasn't valid. That's the arrogance and the ignorance of youth, right? So I was going through this kind of like deep internal struggle, and coming in contact with the Baha'i faith, meeting some of the Baha'is, and those questions that I had that were lingering in my mind, questions about the issue of race, questions about things like the equality of women and men, questions about science and religion, questions about the oneness of mankind, the harmony of all the world's religions, questions about how these discords, these divisions played themselves out in the world, where it seemed to me fundamentally they're at the source of all human creation. There was a vibrational field of unity and oneness. And that was, if you will, the beat or the baseline. You know, we're in the 50th anniversary of hip hop right now, and hip hop is, you know, comes out of this love affair with the beat, with the rhythm, breaking the beats, using records and a turntable to create beats. So this notion of this undergirding rhythm, this baseline, this beat, that humanity is internally wired to bounce their heads to dance to rock to. And it seemed to me that that had to be unity and oneness. I don't know how I knew that. I again, it goes back to being a questioning young person, but there was something in me that said that there was a meter that we were created to respond to. And this vibrational energy was passed between human hearts, between souls, and that we were all wired to respond to that energy. So I'm turning these things over in my mind, and when I come into contact with the Baha'i faith, it was like somebody flipped a switch on for me, flipped the light on for me. And in that moment, as I found myself, it was a process. It wasn't, I think when I first opened a prayer book from the Baha'i writings, and believe you me, I have to be honest, I came to the Baha'i faith wanting to prove the faith wrong. I came to the faith assuming that it was not valid, it could not be true. I came to the faith thinking that I was the one that was going to reveal to this misguided group of people that they were going down this path that will lead them ultimately to destruction. And of course, during the process, I found out that I was the one who actually didn't know what I was talking about. Because when I cracked open the book and looked at the prayers, and for me, we're talking about this vibrational field, this beat, right? This metered kind of rhythm, right, of the heart, of the soul. Khalil Gibran talks about this in his book, The Prophet, right? Talks about the heart, he talks about the strings of the heart, like a lute, and how they quiver with the same music. So when you pluck those strings, it doesn't matter what part of the world, what group of people is plucking those strings. If you're listening and you're attuned to that music, you will respond. So when I cracked open the prayer book and I read the first prayer, I was like, oh man, I'm in trouble now. Because I could recognize that rhythm. It was the same rhythm that I felt when I read the beautiful writings of Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. It's the same rhythm that I felt when I read the Beatitudes, the Old and the New Testament. It was the same rhythm that I felt when I read the Bhagavad Gita, when I read the Tao Te Ching, when I read any book that seemed to have within it, when you read the words, it seemed to be vibrating with this kind of timeless spiritual resonance and energy. So it was familiar to me. There was something familiar. And I still couldn't say Baha'u'llah's name. I would butcher it continuously as I tried to learn it. But I recognized that there was something here that I needed to spend time with. So out of my own mountain of despair, all the things that were going on in my life, came this stone of hope. Now, when I was younger, when I have conversations with young people, I'm very straight up about, what I've been through, what I've seen in my life. I don't want to give young people this. I don't think it's healthy to, I don't think it's healthy to perform what I think a perfect iteration of being a Baha'i is. The Baha'i writing says that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. So for me, it's important to be authentic and truthful when I'm talking about the faith, when I'm talking about my own life, Because in actuality, as Dr. Joy DeGruy, who wrote this incredible book called Post-Traumatic Slavery Syndrome, said to me on numerous occasions, it is our secrets that make us the most sick. It is our secrets that ultimately make us sick. The Bible says, you shall know the truth and the truth shall set you free. So I'm saying all this to say is that when I talk about my past, I was arrested for shoplifting when I was in college. I've been through teen pregnancy as a young person. I've had physical altercations with family members. I spent a little time in jail, all of this stuff. All of that, also the difficult experiences, no doubt, but it also, in a powerful way, gave me this incredible empathy and feeling and awareness for what young people go through as they're matriculating to the various stages of development. So I can rap to somebody on the street who's selling dope and we can have a conversation. Not because I ever sold dope and I didn't, but I know people in my family, people around me that I grew up with who did sell dope. And so I know something of that life, so we can enter into conversation and I don't have to pretend that, I don't know anything about that, or you're a terrible person, or you're going to hell and all of that. It seems to me that at the heart of any true religious or spiritual expression between human beings has to be empathy. We have to cultivate the ability to be empathetic towards, first of all, ourselves and also one another, because that is the source of the heart connection between human souls. If I stand back and I judge you, if I make sweeping indictments of your behavior, while not looking at my own and acknowledging that I have also walked a jagged path, then I'm being judgmental, which is ultimately above my pay grade, right? I can't judge any soul ultimately, right? So that's ultimately above my pay grade. And then I'm also not being realistic and authentic with myself, because we've all stumbled, we've all made mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And that's the beauty and the gift of God's creation. We are meticulously, thoughtfully, creatively, beautifully, perfectly imperfect. God never asked us to be perfect. He or she asked us to strive towards perfection and to get up and try again, to be forgiving of ourselves and also of one another. So coming out of those experiences as a young, and it wasn't, I don't want to paint also a false picture about that. I wasn't inherently a kid that got into a lot of trouble, but I had my experiences, right? So coming out of those experiences, out of the mountain of despair, struggling with the things that I was struggling with growing up, comes this stone of hope in the form of this new revelation from God. What Baha'is believe is the latest revelation from God, and a series of divine revelations throughout human history. A chain of spiritual teaching and enlightenment that has always been with us and will always be with us, right? That stone of hope. So I began this investigation process of the faith, and I began immediately to see that the questions that kept haunting me, that lingered in my soul, that they were being answered. Question of bigotry, and prejudice, and racism that has been so much a part of my own personal life, my family's life, and indeed the lives of all marginalized and dispossessed and displaced peoples across the globe, right? That the principle of principles within the context of the Baha'i faith, Baha'i teachings, is the oneness of mankind. But it's a very key thing that sometimes I think we forget, and I will say that, I will go even further, I will say that sometimes many Baha'is forget. This call to unity or to oneness is not based on uniformity and sameness, it is based on the animating principle of diversity. So what does that mean? That means that we talked about that beat, right? An underlying rhythm that unites all hearts, that unites all humanity, that pulse, right? We're bouncing our heads because we feel ourselves in tune with that pulse. We don't know where it comes from. It doesn't matter where it comes from, in what part of the world, what group of people, but when we hear it, we feel it, we know it, that spirit, right? So we're all connected that way. But then we also have something that we call cultural expression, things that communities have developed over time. And you know, we're talking about a number of different ways of expressing ourselves. You know, in the Western canon of thought, the Western educational system, the supremacy of the written text, right, is law. It's codified, right? It is assumed that if it is not written down, somehow it is not as valuable as other forms of knowledge of knowing. Now, it's very interesting because indigenous communities, African communities, have a different way of looking at the transfer of knowledge. The written text is only one of many ways of knowing. So, in conjunction with the written text, which is a legitimate way of knowing, of passing down knowledge, there is also the oral tradition, right? Speaking history, speaking knowledge, speaking philosophy, speaking wisdom, transferring knowledge from one person to the next that way. There is also kinesthetic in the body, through movement, through dance, right? Through the articulation of the limbs. There is a transfer of knowledge through food. Also, scientists call this gastronomy, right? The preparing of meals. What spices do you use? The history attenuated to every spice, every ingredient in every dish that speaks to the history of a people, right? There's through the sound of rhythm, of the drum, of music, right? We pass our traditions through music, yes? Through clothes, right? How I attire myself, what colors I decide to put on. Am I wearing a hat? Am I not? There's through pattern, right? When I was in Africa, I went through the villages. I went deep down in Mende land, which is where my ancestors are from, which is about 2 hours south of the capital city of Freetown. And I went back in the bush, and this is like Africans have been living like for thousands of years. I mean, it was incredible. But it was not, there were no tall buildings. We're talking about mud huts. We're talking about, you know, mortar and pestles, where the women would stand up and they gather around this huge bowl and they bang and, you know, create grain, you know, pound the grain and all of this sort of thing. And that was, that's an integral part of the survival process for the entire community. So, you know, going into these communities and learning the various different ways that they pass knowledge from one generation to the next. So knowledge then is not, it's not linear. It is circular. It is one modality of transference of knowledge feeding into the next through movement, through sound and music, the body, through clothes, the written text, through the oral traditions. So I forgot exactly where I was going with that. I do this from time to time. I'll start a point and I'll go off on the end. Anybody remind me what point I made before this to go into this side of the conversation? If you don't, we'll just keep going. Anybody? Okay, don't worry about it.
The call to oneness and humanity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Unity.
That's what happens when you get past 45, guys. But yeah, so you know, this idea that you know, this call to oneness, this idea that it's unity and diversity, which is the ultimate principle, which is the actually unity is not possible without the animating principle of diversity. Unity is based on diversity, which is a very different concept, because in the contemporary discourse, we have certain people in our society that will say, well, we shouldn't talk about this issue, and we should stop referring to ourselves as this. It's all about us being one. They want to flatten, right, the dynamic force of cultural creativity and create some kind of facsimile of some kind of neutered, gutted, culturally gutted society that looks the same, but is not animated with any spirit because it doesn't have the diversity in it. So unity and diversity, not unity through sameness. And it's very important to keep that in mind. It is, I would say, a much more challenging way it is a much more challenging way on the surface to approach the establishment of unity. One would look at the flattening of cultural diversity, right? And creating a society that emphasizes sameness and uniformity as being a more effective means of creating unity. I would argue that that is a spiritless attempt at a kind of universalism that is not animated with any creative force. And I would argue, on the other hand, that unity and diversity allows all of us to bring our cultural uniqueness to the table as long as it's in alignment with God's teaching. It's an important point, because there are things that all cultures do, some of which we're going to have to get rid of. I think about in my own cultural heritage, certain parts of Africa. And of course, Africa is not really Africa. What I mean by that is Africa is a Greek and Phoenician word. That is a colonizing word. The original name of Africa was called Akibulan, which is a mixture of African dialects and also Arabic. So, but for the sake of this conversation, let's say Africa. So, things like female genital mutilation, which of course has no place in a society that, in an emerging society based on the Baha'i teachings, that we as Baha'is believe we're building through community engagement and so forth and so on, that stresses the importance of the equality of women and men. As Baha'u'llah said, a man and a woman are like the right and the left wings of a bird. In order for that bird to fly high, to fly straight, to fly stable, both wings have to be strong. So that if I'm only emphasizing the strength of one wing, which historically we can say that has been men, right? Then the full capacity of the human family is not being leveraged, right? All that creative energy, all that intellect, all that spiritual depth, all that insight, right? In some societies, only being perceived as being important if it comes through the prism of masculinity, right? So this emerging, right, realization that in order for humanity to fully maximize and actualize its potential, we have to be diligent, intentional in making sure our young girls, our women, have a pathway to education, both material and spiritual, that we prioritize their education. Baha'u'llah says that if a family has 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl, and because of circumscribed resources, they can only afford to educate one, they should give preference to the girl child because she is the first educator of the next generation. Now, that seems to me very practical, very logical, and also revolutionary, right? Preference must be given to the girl child because she is the first educator of the next generation. So again, I'm having these questions, and I'm reading as I'm reading the writings. I'm going through, reading different historical books and the writings. I'm reading the Dawnbreakers, which, if you are new to investigating the Baha'i faith and you want to read a book with intrigue, with war, with incredible kind of spiritual triumph in the face of seemingly insurmountable adversity, I recommend the Dawnbreakers. Reading the writings of Abdul Baha, the writings of the guardian Shoghi Effendi, appointed the head of the faith after the passing of Abdul Baha, the son of Baha'u'llah, the prophet of the faith. And of course, reading the writings of Baha'u'llah. These questions that I had lingering me, that were haunting me, I'm beginning to find these answers. So we talked about this concept, the spiritual truth, spiritual reality of unity through diversity. We talked about the spiritual reality of the equality of women and men. In fact, I imagine that as we move, as a maturing humanity continues to internalize the spiritual truth and reality, the way we refer to God will not necessarily be in the masculine. It may not ultimately be either in the feminine or the masculine. The Quran says that there are 99 names for the word of God. So, all of these different qualities, these different facets of that creative force, right? The Alpha and the Omega. In the beginning was the Word. This transcendent reality existing above and beyond the capacity of human language to frame it. we can't. It's beyond us. It's above my pay grade. Harmony of science and religion, which again was this lingering question for me, something that continued to haunt me and I couldn't resolve it. And in Baha'u'llah, essentially, the Baha'i writing is essentially teaching us that, and I am going to paraphrase here, but God gave us reason for a reason, that we have a mind to question. In fact, one of the names of one of the Baha'i feasts, which is these gatherings of Baha'is all over the world every 19 days, where the community comes together to pray, to celebrate, to talk about the business of the community and how we can better serve our neighbors and all of that. One of the names of one of those feasts, each of these feasts has a different name, and there's a spiritual quality attenuated that the name of that feast is based on. And one of those names is questions. There's actually a feast of questions. So this idea of questioning, of looking around the corner, peeking under the pillows, asking difficult and challenging questions, is something that we have a spiritual responsibility to do within the context of Baha'i faith. So therefore, reason is not something to be cleaved from human consciousness. It is something to be respected. It is something to be honored and encouraged. So the young child who was me, who was asking the questions why, and sometimes was getting silence for it, actually in retrospect, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was actually exercising a spiritual quality of reason. Of course, that's not the way that I would have said it back then. But in light of my understanding of the Baha'i faith now, that actually was a spiritual quality that I was exercising and demonstrating in my behavior. Question, right? So that means, as the Baha'i writings also say, that religion and science actually are not mutually exclusive, but they're interdependent, that they work together. The Baha'i writings say that if through science, something that was previously considered to be impossible or considered to be completely wrong, if through science we prove it to be right, that knowledge has to be integrated into our understanding of the world, of the universe. So there is this commingling of inquiry with spiritual insight, spiritual wisdom, spiritual teaching, right? All of it descending and coming from God, right? Baha'u'llah says it is the mind of man that has created many out of one. Essentially, I'm paraphrasing again, right? So thinking in terms of unity, these things is not being mutually exclusive, but actually interdependent. So science and religion, equality of women and men, the elimination of prejudice and racism, the oneness of humanity. Another one which is very powerful is this whole idea of the oneness of the world's religions. I told you that one of the lingering questions I had was, why did there seem to be such a discord and sense of disunity between Islam, Christianity, and the other different religions? Judaism, take your pick, whatever, Buddhism, Hinduism, so forth and so on, Zoroastrianism. And then Baha'u'llah, we as Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah is the latest in a lineage of manifestations of God, teachers of the divine will, brought to humanity to educate us and move us from one stage in our development to the next. Baha'u'llah in his teachings introduces this spiritual teaching of progressive revelation. And I remember when I read this, I felt like I had been hit with a bolt of lightning, because it made there was such a simplicity, and there was such an accessible simplicity that was also paired with this bottomless, expansive genius that seemed to be captured within this phrase. Whole concept of progressive revelation. This idea that the teachings of God and the iterations of those teachings through religion, right? Whether it's Baha'i faith, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, going back on through time, that these occur in a progressive way, right? That in some sense, it's kind of like matriculating through the different stages of school. And we begin in basic mathematics. I'm going to use mathematics as a terrible math student, but I'm just going to out myself right now, and I'm going to use mathematics. Start with basic mathematics, right? Learning addition, subtraction. We move on to multiplication, long division, right? We move into basic geometry, right? We move into algebra, algebra 2, trigonometry, calculus, so forth and so on, theoretical mathematics, all of this, right? That those things build one on top of the other, right? And that in order for me to move from long division, right, into basic geometry, I have to have some understanding of the knowledge that preceded geometry so that I'm prepared to grasp the teachings of geometry. So there's no warfare. There's no inherent warfare between geometry and basic mathematics. That actually geometry looks at basic mathematics, and the student comes into geometry with basic mathematics, and they say, you've been prepared to receive this new knowledge. How wonderful. Your teacher taught you well. Come, sit down. I have more to teach you. And that this pattern of matriculation gets repeated over and over again throughout human history and human time. Yes? So that Christ was saying to the followers of Moses, you got the tablets, the commandments of God. You've been taught well. Come, there's more that I have to teach you, right? And the students that were able to recognize, right, the value of what the teacher was offering, and also their need, right, to be delivered from the mess that they had gotten themselves in after they had exhausted all of their machinations to try and figure it out. They had appealed to all of the shibboleths, the old modalities of cohesion, which were now tearing at the very fabrics of their society. They recognized that they couldn't do it alone. They said, yeah, I need to go and get some more knowledge, and knocked on the door. Yo, can I come in? I need to learn what you have to teach me. This gets repeated over and over and over again. Now, what happens to the student after they have mastered geometry? And the algebra teacher says, come on, it's time. You've mastered what you needed to learn in geometry. Come on over, I got some more to teach you. But they refused to go. They refused to go. They could refuse to go for a number of reasons, right? It could be that, I don't know, maybe they're afraid of what Algebra 1 is going to be like. Maybe they love their former teacher so much, they think by embracing the new teacher that somehow they're betraying the old teacher. The sense of loyalty to that old teacher, right? It could be that maybe within the context of their family taught them, right, that you need to stick with this teacher because they have your well-being and your interest at heart. That's the teacher you need to stick with. They have everything you need to learn. Don't worry about this new teacher, right? That's the teacher you need to stick with. So the people in their surroundings and their environment pull them back from learning that new knowledge. Baha'u'llah says that this thing, man, it's amazing. I've been an artist now since I was 4 years old. I've been drawing since I was 4. And I was having a conversation today. And I was saying the thing that I love about creativity and artistry, right? Whether you're a writer, whether you're a visual artist, whether you're a dancer, whether you're a playwright, a poet, what have you. The thing that I love about artistry is at the moment that you think you got it, it changes. And you either have to adapt and discover the beauty in the new change, or you stay stunted where you are. That you can't contain artistry. It continues to unfold. And that's to me, that's the most profoundly astonishing quality that it has. That and the way that it moves people, the way it touches the heart and the soul, right? And in the same way, religious teaching is that way. We can't contain it. We can't arrest it. God is the only one who can arrest that knowledge, right? And as long as humanity continues to progress, there will always be teachers that come to us and say, You've learned what you needed to learn from your previous teacher. Come on into this classroom. I have more to teach you. Now, the interesting thing is, in the Western thought, and this is primarily an innovation of hegemony and white Western imperialistic thought, right? There was the belief that anything outside of the context of Christianity or Judaism was heretical. That the religions that the colonizers encountered when they went into the villages to, at first, make deals with indigenous Africans and then ultimately to enslave them, they dismissed their religious practices as heretical. It's interesting though, if it's true that religious teaching has been with us since the beginning of human history, then that means teachers have been with us all throughout that development and that matriculation. And that means that some of them we know about and some of them we don't. That some of them exist outside of the context of Western hegemony and white colonialist imperialism, right? That there are things to be learned within traditional indigenous practices, be they Native American, be they African, be they from the Caribbean, what have you. That in some sense, the transcendent God has the ability to talk to all of his people. And if this is true, he had the ability to tap on the shoulder somebody from a community that perhaps we've never heard of and say, I've got something for you that you need to teach your people. And he's been doing that since the beginning of time. So this expansiveness of our awareness, our understanding of religious teaching, of religious thought, of the reality, the abundance of God, of the Godhead, of that life force, of that energy, right? The fact that we can't contain it. And whenever we try to tap it down, to frame it, to codify it in such a way that it fits our own personal prejudices, our own personal idea, we recognize that we are utterly incapable of containing that reality. That the most we can do is to attune ourselves to seek to recognize that rhythm, that underlying harmony, that pulse that connects us all, that makes us all one human family, that thing we call spirit, that primary identity, right? We talked about this whole concept of unity and diversity, right? The diversity being this cultural, expression, that differs from, places in the world and so forth and so on. But those are secondary identities, as important as they are. The primary identity is ultimately spiritual in nature. The reason I can say to Farouz that she's my aunt or my, my elder sister is not because I understand necessarily that much about Persian culture. I can, there are very few words I can say in Farsi. I do like the food, love the food. But the thing, it's not my stomach that makes us one. It's that primary identity, the heart, the spirit, that rhythm of the soul, that when she shares with me something of deep import, something that's on her heart, and I can see her spirit opening up, I can recognize that, and we have a connection. That's the vibrational energy of love, friends. That's the connection of the divine spirit, that rhythm that unites us all. And it's our job to attune our ears, our hearts, to recognize that beat, that melody, that rhythm, no matter where it comes from. It can come from a familiar place, or it can come from somewhere that you've never been or don't recognize the language, the people look different than you. It can come from an incredible piece of music by Bach or Beethoven or Mozart. Or it can come from an incredible hip hop, lyric by Lauryn Hill Goody Mob, or Tribe Called Quest, or the Wu-Tang Clan. We just have to attune our ear and our heart to recognize the truth when we hear it. And once we have recognized it, to run to it with open arms, to welcome it into our hearts, and to enter that classroom so that new teacher can bring our development fully in alignment with the requirements of the time, so that we are prepared to create this new emerging world predicated on the principles of justice and equality, and the spiritual law of our oneness and our unity. So I'm going to shut up. I'm done. Maybe we can have some conversation. So.
Thank you so very much, Masud John. It was wonderful. You see how we were lucky to wait. People who wait always get wonderful things. Yes. So, friends, okay, Thosi, please go for it.
Masud, you were
brother.
telling the story of my own life when you were saying that you went through the various types of religions.
Yeah.
Well, then, my great-grandfather is the first to convert from African traditional religion to Christianity.
Yeah.
Then comes my grandfather. Oh, that great-grandfather was an evangelist.
Yeah.
Then comes my grandfather, who was a reverend in the Methodist Church of South Africa. Then comes my father, who first graduated from the University of South Africa in Latin and English. How does a BA in Latin and in English become a minister of religion?
Yeah.
I mean, when you think of, okay, you're going to college, you gain a skill, and then you are going to use that skill to keep yourself alive. What is English? What is English and Latin going to do to a person who becomes a minister of religion? I couldn't figure that out. I could never. Then I would see him getting letters from the British college of some sort, maybe Manchester University. They would give him lectures. He was beginning to train as a lawyer.
Yeah.
Oh, then it fell into place. He was planning to be a lawyer because the legal language in the system that we have requires some kind of understanding of Latin. I thought, okay.
Yeah.
Now he was kicked out of college. I think that's what really got him, because he had organized the political strike at the University of Fort Hare. So he was an activist. Anyway, my upbringing was that we're told that from the age of 2 or 3 or 5, when you see a human being, you must greet them.
Yeah.
They are not a stone, they are not a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't greet them and you leave this world, the ancestors will call you to account.
When I was in Ghana, they told me my guide told me, his name is Gideon. He's a Khan. He's from the Khan people. And he told me, he said, I see you. He said, no, Masud. He said, I see you. And it's such a powerful affirmation of that the power of sight was not about just capturing the physical frame, but he was saying, I see something deeper And it's also really profound. People of African descent in the Baha'i writings are called people of the eye. How powerful is it that one of the greetings in West Africa is that I see you? S. Anyway, so Tosi, I want to. Do
Thank
you
you.
have a? I want to save some room for because I know we probably have some other questions, but I want to
Okay.
honor your. I want to honor like. Do you have, is there a question or something that you had or
All
you
right.
just wanted to share? What were you
What
thinking?
got me into the Baha'i faith was the fear of not following after my father.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Okay, this one converted. It was an evangelist. This one became a minister, and this one became a minister, a very learned minister.
Mm-hmm.
You are the only child.
Yeah.
Are you going to be? Can you afford to break this tradition?
Mm-hmm.
That was my. So when I read, I came across the Baha'i faith through a lady who was doing my clothes. I was a bachelor in Lesotho.
Yeah.
I was a teacher, and when my clothes, got worn out, I would take them to her, and she would do my clothes, and then she would say, "Have you heard of the Baha'i faith? Baha what? Baha what?" She's the Baha'i faith. Then she says, "They are very nice people." Oh, they are very nice. And I'm thinking, well, I have a BSc in education. I know there are no nice people in the world. What is she talking about? Then there was a fireside.
Go on, Tosin. We gotta go, man. We got other people who gotta ask questions, man. Come
Okay.
on. What you want to ask?
I'm going to finish now. Dwight
All right, let's
Allen.
go. Let's go.
Okay. Dwight Allen was talking, and his wife Carol gives me a book, Thief in the Night.
Oh yeah, that did it for me too. That did it for me too. Yeah.
Then other books followed. Then other books followed. So that was my path. And when I heard, oh, they don't have ministers, they have people that they vote for every year. And I said, that's my religion. That's my religion.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you.
Hello, Masud.
What's happening, man? What's going down? Brother Ming. My man Ming. I ain't seen Brother Ming in a minute, man. Oh my gosh, man. How you doing, man?
my hair has changed color since we last.
Man, you still look good, man. You look about. I mean, you don't look a day older than the last time I've ever seen you, man. You can pay me for that one later, okay?
I really appreciated your talk.
Oh man, I appreciate you being here, brother. I really do.
And you said something. You spoke about diversity in ways that I hadn't previously heard anyone speak, and you really emphasized the importance of diversity. And you talked about the flattening phenomenon and so forth.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about, well, okay, so if diversity is so important, why does Baha'u'llah talk about unity? And then it occurred to me that, or the Baha'u'llah talks about the striving for unity, that the importance of us striving for unity. And the key that links those two things together, I believe, is consultation.
I love that. Yeah.
And consultation. I believe in the writings it talks about consultation being the greatest gift, one of the greatest gifts that Baha'u'llah brought. It's the gift of consultation.
Yeah.
And I truly have seen consultation at work, and and it's a beautiful thing. But I just want to thank you for emphasizing the importance of diversity and the value of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. I got to give shout out to big brother Fred. Fred and I have known each other since Atlanta back in the day, and he's such him and his family, such a beautiful souls, and we really miss them here in Atlanta. But we know that you all are doing important work where you are, and it's so good to see you, brother. It's just a real blessing to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much for being here, brother. Yeah.
I thought we heard about from brothers. Let's hear something from the sisters.
Let's do it. I love it. I love it.
Really enjoy your talks. Touches my soul. And you guys both talked about tradition. Tradition is very strong, and it's not only with one culture, but with many culture. And I often joke about mine. Mine come from central part of Iran, and traditionally, we felt we were supreme.
Yeah.
And traditionally, I always joke about where my mother comes from, this village of Kashan called Narak. And I joke and say they were fanatic Shia Muslim. They became fanatic Babis. And then they became fanatic Baha'is. And we do carry those traditions, which is very strong from one generation to other. And as you mentioned, it's only through reading the writings and recognizing that some of these traditions that we have carried on is holding us back.
Yes.
So and of course, this weekend is 60 years. I also live in Alabama, Birmingham.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
And the 16th Street Church of the bombing and the 4 little girls. It's in a couple of days. On the 15th, it will be 60 years. And they're very much on my mind.
Yeah.
And of course, you mentioned the Dawnbreakers. And I see a lot of similarity in how tradition can make a culture do unbelievable things.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you mentioned some of the positive and the negatives of being African Americans, and positive and negative of being Persian. I find that in North America, even in the Baha'i community, Persians and Caucasians and African Americans, other cultures, we have a bit of ghetto attitude. We live more in our own ghetto, and then we touch on others. But I'm wondering how we could work on the attraction. There's a great deal of attraction between cultures. How we could get this unity and diversity stronger, where we are not this kind of ghetto attitude. I don't know if you feel that. I feel it. Tend to be doing that. So I don't know. Are you still in Atlanta?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
So,
I mean,
and I'm wondering if how we could work on that, where we could become less, maybe use the traditions to become more one in our diversity.
For me, it begins with intention, and intention for me needs to be shaped, heavily informed by a few things. First of all, where the need is greatest. Courage, which is such an important part, because I think the lack of courage, the fear of being in spaces that are uncomfortable, where we might be the only one or the only one of a few amongst a sea of people that we're not familiar with, really hinders our connecting with one another. And I'll give you an example. When I was here in Atlanta, they've been having the less so now, but they had the marches for the sister in Iran who was killed. Masud, was it Masud? How do you say her name? Forget her name. The young woman that
Mahsa Amini.
Yes. Thank
So,
you. Thank you.
and
So,
that's
so,
also
so,
happening on the 16th.
yeah. You know, I'm someone who grew up and I had watched old film footage of what took place in Montgomery, Alabama, what took place in Birmingham, what took place in Atlanta, you know, all of these places. And I remember being so inspired by the young people who were out there marching, and people across, you know, across cultural lines, across religious lines. You had Jewish leaders marching with Christian leaders. You had Buddhists. Trip Nhat Hanh was a good friend of Dr. King. So there was a sense that there was this was in kind of an ecumenical approach to liberation in practice across lines. And so I felt it was important for me to go down and march with my brothers and sisters who happen to be of Iranian descent. The reason being is because you know, it's easy to say that I believe and or I'm a proponent for justice. It's easy to say that if the issue confronting me is specifically impacting my own community. That's not that difficult to do. It may be difficult in the sense of I'm going down to march. I don't know what, you know, maybe something will happen. The police might come out or something like that. There's those things, but everybody deals with that. But in terms of putting yourself in a situation where you are one of the only few, that requires an intentionality and the practice of courage. And courage, I believe, is a practice. It's a spiritual quality, but it's a practice. You know, Maya Angelou used to say that she felt the most important spiritual virtue was courage. Now, of course, in the Baha'i faith, we have a slightly different kind of understanding of what the most important virtue is. Ours is truthfulness. But Maya said for her, courage was the most important because you couldn't consistently practice any of the other virtues without courage. And I think she makes a good argument. That's a legitimate argument, right? So I think it seems to me that we have to be intentional about a willingness to suffer the consecrative process of being uncomfortable for the realization of our oneness. Why do I say being uncomfortable is a form of consecration? Because when I choose to place myself in a position where I am going to feel slightly uncomfortable because I'm not familiar with the customs, I'm not familiar with the language, I don't know what these people look like, I've never been around people like that. That becomes, as Dr. King says, he says, it's a kind of form of the suffering, but it's a kind of suffering on being consciously putting yourself in a place of discomfort. It's a kind of suffering, right? Of a kind of suffering of just a sense of comfort. It's a dissonance for a moment, right? But Dr. King says that unearned suffering is redemptive, that there's a redemption on the other end of that suffering, right? So that if I'm choosing to place myself in these situations as a form of consecration, as a testament to my faith and my belief in something that's greater than me, then that in and of itself has a redemptive quality for our souls and for the society as a whole. And for me, that's some important work, and it's worth the sacrifice. So I really think we have to get serious and honest with ourselves about have I been making the choice to place myself in situations where I might be slightly uncomfortable because I'm not familiar with the people and surroundings? And if I haven't been, if I'm only have traditionally been placing myself in situations where I feel comfortable, well, then what am I really doing? I mean, do I really believe in oneness? Is that something that I really have a deep conviction in? Because, you know, if conviction is not backed up by action, it's only it only, you know, it doesn't really transform the heart. We have to see conviction. Conviction is only made conviction through the crucible of action, where words and deeds meet, right? Baha'u'llah says that a man whose words exceed his deeds, right? He says that that man is worth very little, but the man whose deeds exceed his words, that person is worth quite a great deal. So, and I'm paraphrasing again, but so this conscious intentionality, this engagement with communities that are different than me, choosing to place myself in those spaces and not running every time something feels a little bit uncomfortable, refusing to leave, staying there to do the hard work. To me, that is a demonstration of where our deeply held beliefs reside, if they are true or if they're just a performance and they're fundamentally false. So that for me, that's what I see as being important. Yeah.
Masujan, I want to put Regina on spot because this is the first time she joined us from Georgia. And Georgia is a place of Dr. Jane Faley, my real sister. So if Regina, you have a question, please go for it. If not, don't worry.
Thank you so much, Farouz. I appreciate you. And good evening, Masud and everyone.
Hello.
Please excuse the darkness of my screen, but I am being technologically challenged tonight for some reason on this particular device. But at
All
any
good, aren't we all?
yes, and I hail in your presence from Douglasville.
Nice.
Yes.
Round the way, girl.
Excuse me?
I said you were around the way, girl. You an around the way girl.
Yeah, you got that right. You got that right. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah. So my comment is this. First and foremost, thank you so much for your presence. I really am enamored by all that you have shared. Your transparency, just has afforded me to open my own self up, not only to be vocal about my life experiences, but to actually go inward and be reflective of how they have allowed me to grow, how they have caused me to be in unison with like minds, in unison with like spirits. So thank you so much. And that's really what I wanted to share. I appreciate you. And I look forward to meeting you in person someday, okay?
We'll have to figure that out. That sounds great.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will. Be whole
Thank
to
you so
everyone.
much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate
Mhm.
Is there any more questions? Gibby. You know, I call on my friends and my sisters, Masood. They smile, but these are very intelligent people and they ask intelligent questions. Of course, you're not afraid of intelligent questions, Masood, are you?
Every once in a while, I can give a halfway intelligent answer. Every once in a while.
You're muted, Gibby.
Okay, just an observation. The last time we talked, this gentleman offered to be my brother, if you remember. And now hearing you this evening, we're more alike than I thought. And the first word I said as a child, my father told me was why. And he said, you never stopped and you're such, it bothered everybody my entire life. But I don't listen now to the critiques, and I think it was a good thing for me to keep saying why. So thank you for showing me that I'm not unique in that respect.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Friends, any more questions? I just wanted to make a comment that I think truthfulness and courage are so hand in hand. It is impossible to be truthful if you're not courageous. And that's why the Baha'is of Iran are truthful, yet because they are courageous. So it is somehow, you can articulate it so much better than I do. We are so interconnected.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the more that we can, it seems to me that the Baha'i community is maturing. We're going through a maturation process. In a variety of different ways, right? As part of the plan is how you mature, how you grow, right? And I think one of the ways that's really interesting is that we are confronting the trope, the historic trope of a kind of performative perfection that actually distances us from one another and doesn't create intimacy and community. And I think that it seems to me that we're learning that that it is through sharing our authentic selves, both the things that we are proud of and maybe some of the things that have been challenging for us, that we create community and empathy. And that's a risk and courage. It takes courage to take that risk. And I'm not saying that we should be going around blurting our business to everybody. We shouldn't. But what I am saying is that we have to be discriminating about who we share with, but at the same time, we should never, it seems to me, that we should relish the opportunity to share our truth with people and communities that we know that have earned the right to hear our truth and can bear it, and understand that in sharing that truth, that we are opening ourselves up for a more authentic and deepened relationship that ultimately can build community in a very meaningful way. So anyway.
Before we finish, I
Okay.
wanted to read something for you from the chat.
Mm.
And the friends who asked for the recording of this, I'll do my best to send it to you. I wanted to read because my friend left, Joanne Bobien from Montreal. Thank you, Feroz and Masud, for an interesting and heartwarming fireside. Seeing the unity in all our diversity tonight is encouraging. Masud, sharing your story of your courageous, curious journey towards finding your Baha'i path and sharing your knowledge tonight was particularly helpful to me, as I am not a Baha'i. Thank you and bless your days and weeks ahead. Love to all of you.
Wow, what a beautiful note. Wow.
Thank you for that, Feroz. Thank you, Masud.
Hey, man. So good to see you, big bro. Miss you, man. I miss you.
Me too.
Friends, don't go, because I want to ask Masud to say a prayer if you are available to stay a little longer, Masud. And then Pina is here. And if Regina wants to say any kind of a prayer, she's more than welcome. Masud, are you available to say a prayer?
I can say a prayer. Sure, why not? I can do that.
Okay, Regina, if you wish. Pina, after, please.
All right.
Could we also have a closing prayer from Tara?
Of course, Mr. Taherzadeh, glad to see you. You joined us. Yeah, I'll ask Tara if she's still. I can't. Yeah, Tara is here, of course, and Pina is here. So.
Well, I've been thinking about our friends in Morocco, and just what they have suffered as a result of the earthquake that recently hit there, and so they've been on my heart and my mind, and I'll say a prayer thinking about them. So I'll say a prayer for the departed. Oh my God, verily thy servant humble before the majesty of thy divine supremacy, lowly at the door of thy oneness, hath believed in thee and in thy verses, have testified in thy word, have been enkindled with the fire of thy love, have been immersed in the depths of the ocean of thy knowledge, have been attracted by thy breezes, hath relied upon thee, hath turned his face unto thee, hath offered his supplications to thee, and hath been assured of thy pardon and forgiveness. He hath abandoned this mortal life, and hath flown to the kingdom of immortality, yearning for the favor of meeting thee. O Lord, glorify his station. Shelter him under the pavilion of thy supreme mercy. Cause him to enter thy glorious paradise and perpetuate his existence in thine exalted rose garden, that he may plunge into the sea of light in the world of mysteries. Verily thou art the generous, the powerful, the forgiver, and the bestower. Abdul-Baha.
This is remover of difficulties for what is happening in the world. هل من مفرج غير الله قل سبحان الله هو الله كل عباد الله وكل بأمره قائمون. هو ای پروردگار این نفس پاک توجه به ملکوت تو نمود و تضرع و زاری کرد تا نصیر ناسود بود قصد ورود
در ملکوت بقا نمود و توجه به جهان روحانی کرد و امید الطاف نامتناهی داشت. ای آمرزگار گناه بیامرز و عفو غفران مبذول دار. این تشنه را به چشمه حیات رسان و این ماهی را در بحر بی پایان غفران غوطه ده. تا این تر به گلشن رحمانی پرواز نماید و در حدایق عفو و مغفرت نامتناهی درآید. تویی آمرزنده و بخشنده و مهربان. عبدالبها عباس.